Everybody loves a tender, juicy meatball. The problem is very often you end up with a dry, tough, dense meatball. In this Meatball Masterclass, I'm going to share with you all the secrets that Italians use themselves for the juiciest, tenderest, and softest meatballs. Once you've watched this whole video, you'll never have to have a dry meatball again. So today, not only am I going to share the techniques on how to make a perfect meatball, I'm also going to give you two classic, authentic meatball recipes. One from Northern Italy and one from Southern Italy. It's not difficult, you just need to follow these steps, so let's get started. Secret number one, don't use pre-ground meat. This is essential because the pre-ground meat in those containers has been ground really, really finely, and it's almost like a paste. When you try to make a meatball out of that, it's so compact that there's almost no way to get a meatball that's not going to be super dense and tough. All right, if you're not going to use pre-ground meats, what do? The next secret number two, is to either grind it yourself or have your butcher grind it for you. Now I can already hear you, Sal, I don't have a butcher, what do I do? Well, guess what? You actually do have a butcher. Any supermarket that has a meat department has somebody behind the scenes that's cutting the meat, that's grinding the meat. They're doing all this stuff. You could literally go and ask them to grind the meat for you and tell them to grind it coarsely for you. Or you just grind yourself. If you have a KitchenAid that has a grinder attachment or one of those old school ones that you turn, I have my butcher grind it for me, fresh. You can see the difference. As I kind of poke around at this, you can see it. It falls apart a little bit. It's not all compacted and mushy. It's light, it's almost fluffy in texture because I have them do medium coarse grind. There's another benefit to that too, in that you're going to choose the meat that you're going to grind for the meatball. That's another huge thing. So secret number three is to pick the right meat. The classic mixture of meatball is beef, pork, and veal. Now I only use beef and pork. There's some keys to this. What you're looking for is meat that would normally take a long time to cook. Something that has to be broken down, has a lot of gelatin in it. It has maybe some cartilage and connective tissue. All those things, when you grind them up, are going to end up in the finished product. That's what's going to make it really juicy. The meat that you're looking for the beef, you want some stew beef, whether it's chuck, it could be short rib, it could be brisket, something that would be tough if you cooked it quick, but where you're going to grind it, it can be cooked very quickly because now it's broken down. The same goes for pork. What you want is like something from the shoulder or pancetta, the pork belly, something that has some fat, and the meat in it is going to need to be cooked for a long time. I do have another little kind of, this is my thing, that's to grind up some pancetta or guanciale or even bacon, because it has all that fat that slowly releases, and that adds a lot of moisture to the finished product. It also adds a ton of flavor. If you have a food processor, you can pulse it in there, but essentially what you want to do is just chop it up very finely until it's about the same consistency as the grind of the meat. Secret number four is to not use breadcrumbs, but you do need bread. What you should use ideally is some stale bread. And it should also be rustic bread. I wouldn't use white Wonder Bread or anything like that. So that way, if you squeeze it, you can see it has some texture, kind of bounces back. So what I do is I take the crusty bread, I remove the crust as much as I can, I cut it into small cubes, and then I'm gonna let it soak in some milk. So I just pour some milk in there, get it all mixed around, make sure that everything is coated. You really have to use your hands here. I just kind of squeeze it around to make sure the milk is incorporated into all of the bread. Afterwards, this is going to kind of break apart so that way it integrates very well into the meat. Another essential with the bread is you want to use almost as much volume of meat as bread. So if you had like say 3 cups of meat, you'd want to use at least 2 cups of bread. That's going to also add a lot of tenderness, and it's what's going to keep it juicy and moist because it holds on to the liquid that comes out of the fat. We're going to let that bread sit for a minute to really absorb all the milk. In fact, we might even need to add a little bit more milk as it absorbs. At this point, what you put in is kind of up to you. I'll show you what I like to do. I get some eggs. That is pretty much essential. I've got some fresh herbs, some parsley, some thyme, some garlic. I have like a garlic paste that I made. You could slice garlic, you could leave it out, totally up to you. To me, cheese is essential. I put some pecorino romano for that kind of brightness and that a little bit of salty kick, and some Parmesan. I'll give everything a nice mix here. Now we need to add the bread, but first I have to squeeze out that milk. We might still need the milk after, but I'm gonna set it aside. I can see that the bread is still holding its shape a little bit, which is what we don't want, because then we'll have chunks of bread in the meatball. So what I'm gonna do here is just with the fork, I'm just gonna break it up as I mix. After I give it a nice mix, I can see that it just needs a little bit of that milk that I had squeezed out. So I'll add that. Give it a nice mix, get everything incorporated. We're now ready to mix this all together with the meat. But we want to add the meat to the bread instead of the reverse. It's easier to incorporate it that way. And that leads us to our next tip. Secret number 5, don't use your hands. What you want to use is your fork. If you squish this with your hands to get everything evenly incorporated, which is what you want to do, but when you do with your hands, you're compacting everything. You're making a paste out of it. You're not going to get that texture. You're not going to get that tender and soft meatball. I go down and bring all those wet ingredients up and kind of cut into the meat with that edge of the fork. So what it does is it incorporates everything and it still leaves it nice and airy. I just keep going through, up and cut, and I just keep at that for about 5 minutes until I get everything well incorporated. Now you can see that it's nice and kind of fluffy. It looks light, but you can see that everything is nice and homogeneous. Once we have that done, it's time to shape them. So that brings us to secret number 6, which is be gentle. You don't want to squish these because we just again did all that work. You take a little bit, I cup my hand so that way I'm not like gonna squeeze. I cup and I kind of form a light ball. I just set that aside, I dip my hands in a little bit of water, and I do it again. I filled this tray with all those round ones. This is how I'm going to shape them for the tomato sauce. The shape is going to be a little bit different for the fried northern version, which I'll show you in a minute. I have the oven set for 400 degrees, and I'm just going to cook these to get a little crust on them. All I'm looking for is just to kind of seal it so when I put it into the sauce, they don't break apart. And that leads me to tip number 7. Do not overcook your meatballs. Even in a tomato sauce, you can overcook these. They just won't be very juicy. The way around this then is to have a tomato sauce that's already fully cooked. Tomato sauce that I do is just very simple. It's just a rustic passata cooked with a garlic clove and some fresh basil. I let it simmer for about 15 minutes while the meatballs are in the oven. If you have a sauce that you like that's very dense and rich and long cooked, cook it first because you're only going to finish cooking the meatballs in the sauce so that way they don't dry out. These have cooked together with the sauce for about 10 minutes. They're fully cooked through now. The sauce is completely cooked. They're ready to plate up. All right, while I have these going, I'm going to get working on the fried version that you find all over northern Italy. The concept of being gentle is still the same. I don't want to squish these. I just want to get them into sort of a ball and then lightly pack them so that way they're more like patties. Because we're going to fry these, they'll get a more even fry this way than if they were round. Once I have them shaped, they're moist enough now that I can just dip them in some breadcrumbs and the breadcrumbs are going to stick. I get them nicely coated and I set them aside. Those breadcrumbs are going to give it a nice kind of crust when they're fried. And I'm not deep frying these, so I'm not using a ton of oil, just enough to almost come to the top of them. I just gently layer each in. I don't want to overcrowd the pan because then it'll cool down too much and they won't get crispy. I'm going to cook it almost all the way through on that one side before I flip it and finish cooking there. Once you see that it's a nice golden brown like that, depending on how thick your meatball is, it's already almost done. So we want to pull it out when it's basically not quite done. It's going to finish cooking as it sits on that wire rack and cools down. That way, when we break it open, you can see just how juicy that is inside. All right, we're finally ready to give it a taste. I'm gonna start with the fried version, the northern version. We live about an hour from Venice, and these are at all the little snack bars all over Venice. These are just so good. The flavor, first of all, before we even get into the texture, the flavor is incredible because you have that little taste of the pancetta that just, there's something there, you're not quite sure what it is, but it gives it that extra bit of umami. You can taste the cheese, I get the brightness of the pecorino, a little bit of the nuttiness of the Parmesan. It's perfect, it's just an awesome meatball. In fact, I'll even say, these are better than the ones that I get in Venice, in all modesty. All right, I'm gonna go with the Southern Italian one. Everybody's familiar with the tomato sauce version. These are super tender and just soft. They break apart a little bit, but they're not falling apart. All right, let me give it a taste. That's just comfort food at its best. I mean, the flavors are so spot on. That parsley just gives it that nice little zest, and it just so texturally perfect. They are the best meatballs. I know everybody says that. These are better than your nanas, I guarantee. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, I would love it if you could give it a like, get it spread around. I want everybody to know this recipe. I want everybody to be able to make it. And if you do make it, let me know what you think. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video.